The witness had stopped mid-sentence, and the chamber had gone so quiet I could hear the recorder drones humming above the bench. Trailmaster Hesk of the Rao, the finest pursuit predator his species had produced in a generation, stood in the testimony ring with his running limbs folded against his flanks, and he said it again, slower, as if we had not understood him the first time. He was still walking. I am presiding adjudicator Velkorin Sath of the Lane-Conquered Tribunal, and I have spent 109 years hearing testimony in the chamber at Meridian Anchorage. I have presided over fleet seizures, plague quarantines, the dissolution of 2 royal houses, and 1 attempted genocide. I am telling you about the Mercer inquest because the advisory we issued at its end is still in force, because the question we were convened to answer was never actually the question, and because I have not slept properly since the day a 61-year-old human in a gray coat apologized to my tribunal for the inconvenience. The facts before us were these. The Caldrath Combine had been until the previous season the largest tariff-rating syndicate operating across the 11 lanes, 4,000 sworn operatives, 91 registered hulls, and perhaps 40 more flying false papers, holdings on 9 worlds, toll rights extorted from 3 transit authorities, and a standing arrangement with at least 1 member government that I am still not permitted to name. The Combine had existed for 60 years. It dissolved in 61 days. The petition before the tribunal, filed jointly by the surviving Combine officers and the Carhunt Transit Authority, requested a lane-wide ruling on a single point of law whether an open contract, a published bounty, payable to any claimant, could lawfully be posted on a human national. That was the question on paper. The real question, the one every adjudicator on the bench understood within the first hour, was simpler and much worse. The Combine wanted us to tell them what had happened to them. They wanted a category for it. Their own command records, entered into evidence on the first morning, described the cause of their collapse in language I had never before seen in a military document. Not an enemy fleet, not a rival syndicate, not a government action. The record said, in the Combine's own administrative script, the pursuer, 1 pursuer, singular. He was in my chamber that whole first day, sitting in the public gallery, 3rd row beside the water dispenser, Elias Mercer. Human male, 61 standard years, retired. His occupation of record before retirement was long-range search and rescue warden for a human colonial authority, the person sent to walk out into a wilderness and bring back whoever was lost in it. For 11 years he had lived on the Moor world Tessin in a mixed settlement called Lowfield, where he kept weather instruments and repaired drainage pumps for his neighbors. The settlement's registry listed his height, his mass, his blood type, and a note from the colonial physician that read, in full, healthy, stubborn, declined supplements. He did not look like the end of anything. He looked like a man waiting for a ferry. Gray hair cut short, hands folded, a coat the color of wet slate. When the bailiffs had scanned him at the chamber door that morning, the duty officer had flagged him for secondary inspection, not because of anything he carried, but because the officer could not believe the file matched the man. The file said this person had walked the Caldrath Combine to death. The man was reading the tribunal safety placard and drinking water from a paper cone. I called the inquest to order, and we began, as we always begin, with the inciting event. On the 4th day of the wet season, 3 Combine landing craft came down on the Tessin Moor under a tariff enforcement pretext that fooled no one. The Combine had been bleeding revenue on the inner lanes and had moved, as starving organizations do, towards softer prey. Lowfield was soft prey. The raiders stripped the settlement's fuel store, burned its transmitter, and took 12 of its residents for labor ransom, a practice the Combine ran profitably on 4 worlds, because the arithmetic always favored them. Families paid, or authorities paid, or nobody paid, and the taken were absorbed into the Combine's holdings and forgotten. The 12 from Lowfield included a Tasuni brood family of 7, 2 Holland ferry workers, an elderly Dravani archivist, and 2 human agronomists. Elias Mercer was 4 kilometers away when it happened, on the high moor, recalibrating a rain gauge. The raid took 11 minutes. The Combine's own after-action log, entered into evidence, rated the operation flawless and the risk of reprisal negligible. Lowfield had no garrison, no ships, no money. The log's final line assigned the settlement a threat grade of 0. 61 days later, the Caldrath Combine did not exist, and the Tribunal of the 11 Lanes was being asked, in effect, to rule on whether what had been done to it could lawfully be done again. I want the record of this account to be precise about one thing, because every species that reads it will reach for the same wrong explanation, in the same order exactly as my bench did. We assumed weapons, then we assumed augmentation. Then we assumed a concealed human military force operating under civilian cover. We worked through those assumptions the way you check exits in a burning building, with increasing speed and decreasing dignity, and every one of them failed against the evidence, and what was left standing at the end was the truth, and the truth was worse than all of them. The truth was a man with a walking pace of 5.5 kilometers per hour. Trailmaster Hesk was our first witness because he had been there at the beginning, and because the Rao do not lie, their throat structure makes deception physically uncomfortable, which is why every syndicate in the lanes hires them as trackers, and none of them are ever promoted. Hesk had led the Combine's rear security on the Tessin raid. It was Hesk who first saw the human standing on the high moor as the landing craft lifted, a small gray figure against the rain, too far away to matter. He watched us go up, Hesk testified. I marked him as a witness grade 0. We do not silence grade 0 witnesses. It costs more than it saves. The Trailmaster's running limbs flexed and refolded, a Rao habit when recalling motion. Our second craft developed a lift fault and put down at the edge of the salt fen, 40 kilometers north, for repair, routine. We held position for repair and resupply, 11 hours. And the witness? The advocate asked. The witness arrived at hour 9. There was a pause in the chamber, the first of many. 40 kilometers of open moor in rain in the dark across 2 flooded drainage cuts. The advocate, a meticulous Velitri who I think never fully recovered from this inquest, asked Hess to confirm that the human had covered the distance on foot. On foot, Hess said, walking. We saw his thermal mark on the ridge while we ran the engine tests. I assumed a vehicle had dropped him. There was no vehicle. There were footprints. He stood on the ridge in the rain and watched us at the edge of our floodlights and did not approach and did not leave. For how long? 2 hours. Then the craft was repaired and we lifted. I logged him, and here Hesk's voice did something I had not heard a Rao voice do, a kind of flattening. I logged him as no threat, on foot, abandoned by distance. That is the standard entry for a pursuer you have outrun, abandoned by distance. We use it because no one crosses open country fast enough to matter against a flight vehicle. And was he abandoned by distance, Trailmaster? Hesk was quiet for a moment. On the gallery's third row, the human was refilling his paper cone at the water dispenser carefully, so as not to spill on the floor. No, Hesk said, he was not. The Combine's second craft had lifted from Tessin to the lane port at Velas Shoal, the first staging stop on the syndicate's withdrawal route. Velas Shoal is a free port. Anyone may travel there who can pay, and a colonial search and rescue pension, it turns out, is enough to pay. 16 days after the raid, Trailmaster Hesk was supervising cargo transfer on the Velas Shoal flats when a dockhand mentioned that a human had been asking, politely, at every berth on the eastern quay, whether anyone had seen a Combine freighter come through with passengers who did not want to be aboard. I went to look, Hesk testified. I told myself it was a different human. They are difficult to tell apart at first. His running limbs flexed again. It was the same one, same coat. He was standing at the foot of our berth with his hands in his pockets, reading the hull registry the way you read a door sign. He saw me on the gantry. He nodded to you, the way neighbors do, Hesk said, on the moor when they pass each other and the weather is bad. Adjudicator Farron, on my left, leaned into the bench's privacy field and said quietly that we were watching a syndicate trailmaster describe a 61-year-old pensioner the way coastal species describe a rising tide. I noted the observation. I did not yet share the feeling beneath it. That came later, and it came for all of us. The advocate asked the question the whole chamber was waiting on. Trailmaster, at that point, 16 days in, the human had located your vessel across an interplanetary transit. What did your command assess? That he had registered a grievance and would file it with the port authority, Hesk said. Humans are a documented species, lawful, slow, fond of paperwork. The assessment was that he had come to make a report. The standing order was to ignore him. A long pause. I want the record to show that I objected to that order. On what grounds? On the grounds that I had seen his footprints on the fen, Hesk said. 40 kilometers in 9 hours in the rain in the dark at a steady pace, alone with no light. Nothing walks like that. Predators sprint and rest. Grazers drift and scatter. Nothing walks 40 kilometers in a straight line in the rain toward 3 armed landing craft and then stands still. Watching for 2 hours with a heart rate, he checked his notes, because the Rao check their notes even when they remember that our perimeter scan recorded at 58 beats per minute. The advocate looked up. Is that figure significant? I did not know what it meant then, Hesk said. I know now. 58 is a human at rest. He had walked all night through a flooded fen to stand within reach of the people who had taken his neighbors, and his body believed it was at rest. The Trailmaster folded his running limbs in tight the way the Rao do against cold. On my world, when you see an animal whose body does that, you do not log at grade 0. You leave the territory. I called a recess at mid-shift, not because the schedule required it, because Adjudicator Ulismar had requested the human's pension records, expecting to find concealed military service, and the records had arrived. and they contained nothing but 40 years of search and rescue logs, and one of the entries had made him stop reading and ask the bench archivist, in a voice I had known for 60 years and did not recognize, whether the human reporting format permitted exaggeration. The entry was from Mercer's working years, before retirement. It recorded the recovery of a downed survey pilot from a polar plateau. The distance walked was given as 310 kilometers. The duration as 6 days. The temperature as 40 below freezing. The final line of the entry, in the human's own hand, read, "Pilot recovered alive. Uneventful." The archivist confirmed that the format did not permit exaggeration, and that the entry had been countersigned by the pilot. In the gallery, the human was helping an elderly Dravani clerk pick up a dropped stylus because she could not bend and he could. When the session resumed, the advocate took Trail Master Hesk forward to the 23rd day, because that was the day the Combine stopped ignoring the human and started running from him, although none of them would have used that word yet. The word they used was repositioning. The freighter carrying the 12 had moved from Velas Shoal to Carhunt, where the Combine held toll rights over the high desert crossings and kept a fortified depot at an oasis settlement called Brassmark. The transfer was made quietly, on a hull with clean papers, with the prisoners logged as contract labor. There is no passenger manifest in the lanes that a determined clerk cannot falsify. The Combine's officers were confident the trail was cut. 11 days later, the human walked into Brassmark out of the open desert, from the north, which is the direction nothing comes from, because to the north of Brassmark, there is nothing but the Carhunt Flats. 400 kilometers of salt pan, where the day temperature kills unprotected travelers in hours. He did not hide his approach, Hesk testified. Our perimeter picked him up at 12 kilometers. One figure, on foot, walking the flats in the last of the day heat. The watch officer assumed a censor ghost, then a vagrant, then a dying man. We sent a skimmer out because a dying man on your perimeter brings port inspectors. The trailmaster's voice flattened again. The skimmer crew reported a human in a sun hood, walking, who declined assistance, thanked them for stopping, and asked whether the Combine depot ahead was the one holding the people taken from Tessin. What did the crew do? They radioed for instructions. There were no instructions. There was no protocol for it. Hesk looked at the bench, and I understood that what I saw in his eyes was not fear of the human. It was the older discomfort of a professional who has discovered that his profession has a hole in it. Honored adjudicators. I have tracked for 30 years. Everything that moves across country obeys one law. Effort is spent from a reserve, and the reserve must be refilled. A sprinter empties in minutes. A pack hunter in an hour. The great engine beasts of Rauholm empty in a day and sleep for 3. When you flee something, you are making a wager about its reserve that it will empty before yours does. Every pursuit in the natural universe is that wager. The advocate let the silence sit, then said, "And the human?" "We could not find the bottom of the reserve," Hesk said. "That is the testimony. We never found the bottom." He crossed the Carhunt Flats in 5 days on perhaps 30 kilos of water and salt rations, walking through the cool hours, sheltering through the killing heat under a reflective sheet, and he arrived at our perimeter with a resting pulse and asked us a question. The wager does not work on them. You cannot outweigh a thing that empties slower than you do, and they empty slower than anything I have measured. Adjudicator Farron asked the obvious question, why the depot had not simply shot him on the flats. The chamber learned then what the Combine's command had learned by the 23rd day, that the human had filed his grievance after all, not with the Port Authority, with everyone. At Velas Shoal he had registered the names of the 12 with the lane's missing persons trust, posted the Combine hull's registry at the Seafarers' Hall, and left a deposition with a notary. He had done it all in plain sight, slowly, on foot, politely. Shooting him on the flats meant shooting the one person every dock clerk on 2 worlds now associated with 12 names the Combine was pretending not to hold. The arithmetic that had made Lowfield safe to raid had quietly inverted. Killing the witness now cost more than it saved. "So your command did what?" Farron asked. "Posted a contract," Hess said. "Closed at first. 40,000 to any sworn operative who removed him discreetly off-world away from the trail he had made. 3 teams accepted." He stopped. The advocate had to prompt him. The first team tracked him into the canyon country east of Brassmark, where he had gone because the depot commander had moved the prisoners again. And I will say to the tribunal that by then we were moving them not as logistics but as flight, though no one wrote that word either. The first team was RAW-led, sprint-capable. They planned a relay pursuit, 2 runners resting while one pressed, the standard method for exhausting an endurance quarry. The result? The method assumes the quarry sprints when pressed. He did not sprint. He had looked at the canyon map the way he looked at everything, and he simply did not go where pressing him should have made him go. He walked, at his pace, on his line, through the 3rd night, And the third night was a cold snap, and the team had planned for a pursuit of hours, not days. Hesk's running limbs were perfectly still now. 2 of the 3 reached the depot with frost injuries. The third did not reach the depot. And the human? The human walked out of the canyon country on the morning of the 5th day, Hesk said, and resumed his heading, and his heading, honored adjudicators, was the same heading it had been since Tessin. At no point in 61 days did his heading change. We mapped it afterward, the whole route, 11 worlds, every crossing. He looked down at his notes and did not read from them. You can lay a straight edge against most of it. The straight edge points at the prisoners. It always pointed at the prisoners. Everything we did, every transfer, every false manifest, every team we spent against him, every one of those things moved the line's far end, and none of them ever moved him off the line. It was at this point in the first day that my bench made its first formal recalibration, and because this account is a record, I will enter it plainly. At the mid-shift recess, the tribunal's threat assessor had carried the human on our own internal docket at the standard, civilian grade, which is to say no grade at all. After Hesk's testimony on the canyon pursuit, the assessor came to the bench and requested permission to reclassify a retired pensioner, present in the gallery, unarmed 61 years old, as an anomalous capability requiring advisory review. I granted it. I want the record to show that I granted it without hesitation and that the assessor's hands were unsteady and that neither of us could have articulated, that afternoon, exactly what we believed the capability to be. We only knew that a wall in our category system had been leaned on and had moved. The advocate closed the first day's examination with a final question to the trailmaster, the question that gave the inquest its shape. In your professional judgment, Trailmaster Hesk, as the finest tracker your service has produced, at what point could the Combine have escaped? Him? Hesk stood in the testimony ring for a long moment in the gallery. The human had stopped drinking his water and was looking at his own folded hands with an expression I would later come to recognize. It was embarrassment. He was embarrassed for the witness or for the Combine or for the whole proceeding. I never learned which, and I am not sure it matters. On the first day, Hesk said at last, before the lift fault, if the second craft had not gone down for repair, he would have stood on the moor with nothing to follow, and that would have been the end. You're saying the Combine's error was a mechanical fault? No, Hesk said. I am saying the universe gave him 9 hours of standing still to look at, and he chose to walk 40 kilometers toward it instead. The fault was not mechanical. The fault was that we taught him we could be found. After that, there was no point of escape. There are species you escape by distance and species you escape by time. I have testified before tribunals about both kinds. The trailmaster turned deliberately and looked at the gallery, at the gray-haired man beside the water dispenser, and the man looked back at him with the mild, apologetic patience of a neighbor caught in a long queue. This is neither kind. Distance does not accumulate against a thing that does not stop, and time is on its side, not yours. The only escape was to be a stranger to him, and we gave that up in 11 minutes on Tessin, for a fuel store and 12 laborers. The advocate said, one final question. You resigned your commission before the Combine fell. You were the first senior officer to do so. Why? Because I am a tracker, Hesk said, and a tracker's first duty is to know when he is no longer the one tracking. I worked that out on day 23 on the wall at Brassmark, watching him come out of the flats. The depot held 900 armed operatives behind a fortified wall, and I stood on that wall at dusk and realized that every one of us was inside the perimeter, and he was outside it, and I could not make the arithmetic say which of those was the trap. He folded his running limbs. My resignation is in evidence. I have nothing further. I adjourned the first day. The human stayed behind to stack his paper cones in the disposal slot, because the gallery attendants were short-handed, and then he asked the bailiff, I have this from the bailiff directly, who reported it as though reporting contraband, whether there was anywhere on the station a man could take a decent walk. The second day belonged to the physicians, and if the first day had moved a wall in my category system, the second day removed the wall entirely, took its measurements, and showed the bench that the wall had never been load-bearing in the first place. The Combine's former surgeon adjunct was sworn in at first bell. Her name was Kiev Alisson, a Velitri of the medical caste, and she had examined Elias Mercer once in person, under flag of truce, on the 44th day of the pursuit, in circumstances the tribunal would spend most of the morning establishing, because the idea that the Combine had by day 444 requested a medical examination of the man destroying it struck every adjudicator on the bench as the testimony of a deranged witness. It was not. It was the testimony of an organization trying, in the only language it had left, to find out what it was dying of. Surgeon Adjunct Kiev Alisson took the testimony ring with a case of holographic plates and the particular composure of a clinician who has decided that the only way through a memory is to present it as data. I have seen that composure before in plague inquests. It is what medical professionals wear when the alternative is something less dignified. She began with the context. By the 44th day, the Combine had moved the 12 prisoners 5 times across 4 worlds. It had spent 3 contract teams against the pursuer and lost the better part of 2. Desertion among rank operatives had reached 11% and was compounding, and the human had appeared that morning at the public gate of the Combine's transit station on Hallam Deep. Not attacking it, because in 61 days he never attacked anything, but standing outside it in the rain again, asking the gate watch in his flat, polite voice whether the people from Tessin were inside. The station commander invoked parley, Allison testified. A flag of truce meeting in the gatehouse. The stated purpose was negotiation. The actual purpose, I was briefed on the actual purpose, was assessment. I was instructed to observe the subject at close range and determine what we were dealing with. Command's standing theory at that time was concealed augmentation, military hardware in a civilian body. It was the only theory left that allowed anyone to sleep. And the human consented to examination? He volunteered, she said. That is the part I was not prepared for. I had a scanner array concealed in the gatehouse and a story prepared to justify its readings. I did not need the story. He saw the array cover in the first minute. He looks at rooms the way dock inspectors look at manifests, and he said that, if it would move things along, I was welcome to scan whatever I liked. Then he sat down in the chair and let an enemy physician examine him for 2 hours and drank the tea we gave him, and thanked us for it. Adjudicator Ulismar asked why a man in his position would do that. The surgeon adjunct considered the question. I asked him the same thing. He said that people are less frightened of things they understand. She paused. Honored adjudicators, I have repeated that sentence to myself most nights since. He was not wrong about the principle. He was wrong about us. We understood him considerably better after the examination, and no one who read my report was ever less frightened again. The report was entered into evidence as Inquest Plate 7, and Al-Azan walked the bench through it, hologram by hologram, in the bright clinical voice of a teacher, and I will summarize here what the Tribunal of the 11 Lanes learned in that session about the species we had been sharing the lanes with for 200 years. There was no augmentation. That was the first finding, and she dispensed with it in a sentence. No hardware, no engineered tissue, no chemical enhancement. A baseline human male, past his species' physical prime, with old fracture lines in one arm and one ankle, scarring consistent with frostbite across 2 fingers, and the joints of a man who had carried loads over country for 40 years. Aside from the wear, she said, he was unremarkable. And then she said, by human standards. The second finding was the cooling. She put the thermal plates up and let him speak. Every pursuit species in the lane survey, Rao sprinters, Holland pack runners, the great Dravani striders, sheds heat through respiratory exchange, lungs and airway. It is efficient at rest and catastrophic under sustained load, because the same organ doing the cooling is doing the breathing, and under load both demands rise together until one wins. That is the reserve Trailmaster Hesk had testified about. That is the bottom every tracker is taught to wait for. Heat is the wall. Humans, Allison said, are not cooled by their lungs. They are cooled by their skin. The entire body surface is an evaporative radiator, fed by dedicated glands, hormonally governed, independent of the breathing cycle. Under load, a human does not approach the wall. The human sweats, and the wall moves. As long as there is water and salt, the wall keeps moving. The literature on their home biosphere calls the result persistence predation. It was not a niche behavior for them. It was the ancestral hunting method of their entire line. Before they had tools worth speaking of, they ran down quadrupeds 3 times their speed by following them at a walk through the heat of the day until the animal's cooling failed and it simply lay down. She let the plate rotate. Every adjudicator on this bench is descended from something that escaped its predator. I asked the tribunal to sit for a moment with the idea of a predator that cannot be escaped, only outlasted, and then to sit with the fact that it also cannot be outlasted. The chamber was silent. On the gallery's 3rd row, the subject of Inquest Plate 7 was listening with the faintly pained look of a man hearing his medical file read aloud, which is what was happening. The third finding was the economy. She showed us the metabolic plates. At his walking pace, the pace the Combine's perimeter logs had recorded, unvarying, on 11 worlds. The human burned energy at a rate her own species would consider a light fast. He could meet it from body reserves alone for days. He could meet it from the kind of food that exists everywhere. Grain, root flour, oil, the dock worker rations sold in every port indefinitely. There was no supply line to cut, she said, because his species' supply line is the concept of food itself. The Combine had twice purchased every transport seat out of a settlement to strand him. He had eaten porridge at the Seafarers' Hall and walked out the cargo road, and the stranding had cost the Combine more than it cost him. The fourth finding, she almost declined to present, and I watched her decide to present it, and I respect her for it. It was the sleep work. During the Parley examination, she had asked the human, conversationally, how he was sleeping, and he had answered accurately in the way he answered everything. 4 hours at dusk, a half-watch rest at deep night, walking by the cool hours. She had assumed this was hardship endured. The plate said otherwise. The plate said the human nervous system can run that pattern for weeks, while consolidating it nightly, that it was not a deficit being accumulated but a mode being operated. We had been spending teams to deny him rest, she said. The night ambush on Carhent was designed around the doctrine that a quarry pressed for 3 nights collapses on the 4th. I certified that doctrine myself. It is sound for every species I trained on. She closed the plate. We pressed him for 3 nights. On the 4th morning, the ambush team requested extraction, and he walked past their extraction point at dawn, at his pace, on his line, and one of the team, this is in the deposition, one of the team said his footsteps never once changed rhythm in the dark, and that this was the worst sound he had heard in 11 years of contract work. Not fast, not just the next step, all night, somewhere out in the rain. Adjudicator Farron, who is a kind judge and was a soldier once, asked the surgeon adjunct the question that the bench had been circling all morning. Doctor, you examined him at close range for 2 hours. Set aside the plates. What is your clinical impression of the man himself, his state of mind on the 44th day, having crossed 4 worlds on foot, having been hunted by his own bounty teams? Alison stood very still. My clinical impression, she said, is that he was rested, adequately nourished, mildly concerned about the prisoner's welfare, and otherwise content. His stress markers were lower than those of every Combine officer in the building. His blood chemistry was that of a man on a long holiday. She looked down. Honored adjudicator, I have served in 2 wars. I know what it does to a body to be pursued, because I have treated it. I sat for 2 hours with a man being hunted across the lanes by 4,000 sworn operatives, and physiologically speaking, the only party in that war who was not suffering from it was him. When my report reached Combine Command, the senior staff concluded the scans had been spoofed. They could not accept them. I want to be precise about why, because it is the heart of what I came here to say. She raised her eyes to the bench. Every doctrine we possess, military, medical, predatory, rests on one assumption so deep we have never had to write it down. That pursuit is expensive, and flight is cheap. That the hunter spends and the quarry saves. The human inverts it. For him, the pursuit cost a pension and some boot leather. For us, every hour of being pursued cost morale, money, desertion, sleep. We were the ones emptying. He was a man taking a walk. The advocate asked his closing question. Doctor, your report ends with a recommendation to combine command. Read it to the tribunal, please. She did not need to look at the plate. Recommendation, return the 12. The subject's demands are finite, specific and lawful. His capacity is not finite. End the arithmetic. And command's response? Command doubled the contract on him, she said, and transferred the prisoners a 6th time, and the senior strategist told me, I will give the tribunal his exact words, because they should be in a record somewhere. He told me, everything tires, doctor. Everything stops. We only have to be ahead of him when he does. The surgeon adjunct closed her case of plates with a small final click. That officer is now at deposition, honored adjudicators, taken at a relief station on the Spire roads, where he surrendered to lane authorities, on foot, having walked the last 40 kilometers himself, because, and this is also in his deposition, because by the end he could not bear to be inside anything slower than he was. The tribunal may draw its own conclusions about who stopped first. The 3rd day was the day of the small witnesses, and I have come to believe it was the most important day of the inquest. Because syndicates are not killed by physiology. They are killed by what physiology does to belief. The Combine did not fall because one human could outwalk it. The Combine fell because 4,000 operatives discovered, one settlement at a time, what the lane's freight workers and toll clerks already knew by then, and what they had begun calling him in the way working people name a weather system, plainly and without ceremony. The dockhands at Velishol had started it. The depositions agreed. The one who walks. Warden Bessick Tor of the Carhent Transit Authority was sworn at first bell, a toll warden, retired, who had run the high-pass station above Brassmark for 30 years. He testified in the manner of a man who had told this story many times to friends, and was determined to tell it the same way under oath. He came through my pass 4 times, Tor said. First time, day 25 or so, going east after the prisoners. He paid the foot toll exact. Asked me how the weather sat over the flats, wrote something in a little book, thanked me, walked on. I thought he was a surveyor. Tor's frill settled. Second time, 8 days on, coming back west because they'd flown the prisoners back behind him, They thought putting him at their backs reset things, you understand, like a board game. He paid the toll exact again, asked after the weather again. And I will tell the tribunal the same thing I told my wife that night. It was the pace that put the cold in me. Same pace coming back as going out. 8 days hard country, and the man came through my gate like the gate was where he'd been headed all along, and the far side of the world was just what the gate happened to be attached to. The advocate asked him about the third time. Third time he came through, day 40 or near it, there were 2 combine watchers at my station, posted to flag him, call the bounty teams in ahead of him. Lawful papers, I couldn't refuse them post. They sat in my watchroom and watched the flats for 6 days, betting each other when he'd show. And he showed at dusk on the 6th day, this little gray mark out on the salt with the heat shimmer dying around it, walking the same walk. And I will tell you what happened in my watchroom. Because it is what happened everywhere. It is what happened to the whole combine, if you ask me. Nobody called anybody. Tor's frill flattened. The senior watcher stood at my window and looked at that little mark for the better part of an hour. The mark didn't get faster. The mark didn't get slower. The mark just got bigger. And the watcher put on his coat, and he said to no one in particular, "I signed for a man, not for that," and he walked out my south door, downhill away. And the junior one paid my toll and followed him. They left their kit, 2 trained contract men, and what broke them wasn't a weapon and wasn't a threat, because the human never made one. It was watching something come toward them at 5 kilometers an hour for an hour, knowing the whole time it was coming for the building they were sitting in, and knowing, this is the part, sirs, knowing that tomorrow it would still be coming, and the day after, and that being faster than it had stopped meaning anything weeks ago. Distance had stopped being real for that man, and they'd been close enough to feel it stopped being real for them too. And the 4th time he came through your pass? 4th time was after, Tor said. After Stonefall, after it was done, going home. He had the 12 with him as far as my station. There's a ferry connection below. The broodmother was carrying her smallest, and the human carried the old Dravani archivist's case on his back, on top of his own pack. The warden's voice did not change, but his frill rose, which among his people is grief or pride, and his next words suggested both. He paid 13-foot tolls. Exact. I tried to waive it. He wouldn't have it waived. He said tolls were how the pass kept its road mended, and the road had been good to him. Tor looked at the gallery, at the man in the gray coat, and then back at the bench. Honored adjudicators, you've had the trackers, and you've had the doctors, and I'm only a toll man, but you should have it from a toll man too. There was nothing wrong with him. That's the thing you should write down. Everything that came through my pass in 30 years was either running from something or running at something, and you could read it on them like weather. This one was the only calm thing on that road, all 60 days. The 4,000 were the storm. He was the one walking through it. The depositions came after, read into the record by the registrar because the deponents had refused, to the last one, to appear in the same chamber as the subject. The tribunal heard 14 of them across the afternoon. I will enter 3 here, because the inquest's published record is long, and this account is for those who will not read all of it. The first was the surviving member of the second bounty team, a Holland contract runner. His team had taken the 40,000 contract on day 26 and tracked the human into the flooded lowlands of Drev's anchorage, where they had done the professional thing, the textbook thing. They had gotten ahead of his line and set the ambush at the only causeway through the marsh, because his line ran straight always, and a straight line is a gift to an ambusher. The deposition stated that the team waited 2 days in the blind at the causeway. The human arrived on schedule at his pace and stopped, 1,100 meters short, out of range, in the open, in the rain, and stood there. He had read the ground, the deposition said. Or read us. I don't know. He stood there with his hands in his pockets, and he waited, and we waited. And you must understand the blind was chest-deep marsh water with a breathing screen, and we were in it, and he was just standing on the good ground, resting. Standing there was costing him nothing. The marsh was costing us everything. That water pulls heat like an open vein. He waited 11 hours. He never made a sound, never raised a hand. At dark, our junior began shaking too hard to hold the screen, and we pulled out. And when we came up the bank, the human nodded to us. Nodded, the way you greet a work crew, and detoured around the causeway through 4 kilometers of bog we'd have sworn nothing could walk, and was gone west by morning. We did not refile for the contract. You cannot ambush a thing that is not in a hurry. The whole craft of the ambush is built on the quarry's hurry. He has none. Somewhere out past Drev's anchorage, there is a marsh with 11 hours of my life in it, and that is the cheapest anyone got off all season. The second deposition was from the Combine's lane master of finance, and it was a column of numbers, and the registrar read every line, and the chamber listened to a syndicate's death, rendered as accounting. The raid on Tessin had grossed the Combine the equivalent of 110,000 in fuel, stores, and projected ransoms. Against it, the Lane Master set the 61 days, 3 contract teams, 2 lost. The doubled bounty, unclaimed but its escrow frozen by Lane authorities after the notary deposition surfaced. 6 prisoner transfers, each at hull cost. 9 port calls cut short ahead of 1 pedestrian, with demurrage and forfeited berths. Insurance reweighting on every registered hull after the missing persons trust circulated the names. 11% desertion compounding to 34 by day 50. The Lane Master's final entry, dated 4 days before the end, read, net position of the Tessin operation, ruinous. Recommend the Combine cease evaluating the pursuer as a security threat and begin evaluating him as a structural cost, in the category of weather, tide, or tariff. Phenomena that are not fought but routed around. Note for the record that routing around him has been attempted on 6 worlds and that he does not route. He is the only cost in this ledger that walks toward the expenditure. The third deposition was 9 words long, and the registrar read it twice at the advocate's request, because it was the entire statement of a gate guard from the 5th transfer site, a man who had deserted the same night and surrendered his arms at a relief station, and who had answered every question at his deposition with silence, except the last one, which was, "Do you have anything to add for the record?" He stopped at our gate and asked for them politely. That was the whole of it. The registrar set it down, and in the chamber's quiet I heard, from the direction of the gallery's 3rd row, the small sound of a paper cone being crumpled slowly by a man who had plainly hoped, until that moment, that the guard in question had gone on to some quieter line of work. It was the only sound the human made in 3 days. The bench pretended not to hear it. The transcript, which pretends nothing, records it as disturbance, gallery, unattributed. The registrar was not finished with us. The evening session of the 3rd day held 2 more witnesses, and between them they closed the last 2 doors the bench had been keeping propped open. The door marked surely someone could simply have shot him, and the door marked surely this was, in the end, only one man's stubbornness and not a method. The first door was closed by the deposition of the 3rd bounty team, which was not a team at all. After the causeway, no team would refile. What the Combine bought instead, on day 38, at 5 times the original contract, was a single specialist. A long-glass marksman of the Sereth School, Lane licensed, with 22 sanctioned completions, and a reputation for never being seen by the subject before or after. His deposition was taken under seal at his guild house, and his guild fought its release and lost, and I understand why they fought. It is not testimony that helps the trade. The marksman had done what his craft prescribed. He had studied the route plans the human filed at every border, and the deposition notes, with professional irritation, that working from the subject's own published route felt wrong from the first hour, like an offered handshake, and he had set up on the high ground over the Spire roads, where the human's line crossed 2 days of open scree with no cover and no deviation possible. Wind steady, light good, range comfortable. The deposition states that the human entered the glass at mid-morning of the 40th day, alone on the gray stone, walking, and that the shot was clean from the first minute and remained clean for 11 hours and was never taken. The advocate had the registrar read the marksman's own account of those 11 hours twice. I will enter the heart of it. Understand that I do not miss and I do not hesitate. I am not a soldier. I feel nothing toward a subject. A subject is a problem of wind and movement. I wanted on the record that what happened on the scree was not conscience. I watched him through the glass for 11 hours and I did not fire, and these are the reasons in the order I discovered them. First, he walked at 1 speed. A glass man lives on rhythm. Every subject has a rhythm, and every rhythm has a flaw, a hitch, a moment of settling where the body forgives you the shot. He had no such moment. The pace never broke, uphill, downhill, on loose stone and wind. By the 3rd hour, the rhythm stopped feeling like a gate and started feeling like a mechanism, like watching a pendulum that had been set swinging before I was born. You do not shoot a pendulum. You wait for it to stop, and it does not stop, and the waiting begins to work on you instead. At the noon halt, he sat on a flat stone. In the open, facing my ridge, there were 4 ridges, and he faced mine, and he ate, and he looked at my position while he ate. Not at me. I was 900 meters back in rock shadow under a screen. No eye finds that. He looked at the position the way a man looks at the one chair in a room where a guest would sit if a guest ever came. He knew the ground that well. He had been reading the ground the whole 40 days, the same way he read it at the causeway, and the scree had exactly 1 glass position worth using, and he ate his meal facing it, chewing, patient, the way you sit with a shy animal to let it decide about you. Third, and I have given this reason to no one but this deposition, and my guild may do with it what it likes. At the end of the halt he stood and shouldered the pack, and before he walked on he raised one hand toward my ridge. Not a signal, not a challenge. The gesture neighbors make on a cold road to someone they cannot quite see, and then he showed me his back and walked at that pace north toward the people who were paying me. And I lay on the stone with the finest glass my guild issues, and the truth arrived in me the way altitude. Sickness arrives, all at once, behind the eyes. The contract was facing the wrong way. I had been sold a target and issued a direction, and the direction was wrong. Nothing about the man in my glass was fleeing, and a marksman's whole craft, when you boil the fat off it, is the punctuation of flight. We end things that are running out. He was not running out. He was running in. Into the contract, into the guns, into the only future on the board at 5 kilometers an hour, with his route filed at the border like a man who wants witnesses, and you cannot punctuate that. The sentence is not yours. The sentence was never yours. I cased the glass at dark, walked down the far side of the ridge, returned the advance with the wind fee deducted, and recorded the completion refused. Reason filed with the guild. The subject was not flightworthy. There is no such category. There is now. My guild house has since declined 4 contracts on human nationals, and we have told the brokers plainly that the school does not take work that faces the wrong way, and when the brokers ask what that means, we tell them to post the contract and walk the route themselves and see which direction their feet want to point. The chamber sat with that for some time. Adjudicator Farron made a note I later saw. It said only, even their predators understood it before we did. The second door, the door marked only stubbornness, not method, was closed by a witness nobody had thought of as a witness at all. A junior records clerk of the Lane's Missing Persons Trust, a Tasuni herself, 4 years sworn, who had processed the documents the human filed at Vela Shoal on the 16th day, and at every border after. She was nervous in the ring and exact on the record, the combination every registrar prays for, and what she laid before the bench was the part of the pursuit no one had watched happening because it did not walk and did not bleed. The paper. 12 names registered with the trust, with biometric affidavits sworn from settlement records, which made the 12 legally visible on every signatory world, so that each combine transfer, each false manifest, was no longer quiet smuggling but documented trafficking of registered persons, compounding at every port. The Hull registry posted at the Seafarers' Hall, which by Lane custom flagged it in every union hiring book in 11 systems, so that crews began declining combine berths. Not from fear, from paperwork. No rated sailor signs onto a hull the unions have inked. The notarized deposition, renewed at each border with the route plan, which assembled, fortnight by fortnight, into a single continuous sworn record of pursuit, what the clerk called, with the reverence of her trade, a perfected claim. And the insurance circulars. She explained the insurance circulars. I had not known, before the Mercer inquest, that I would one day preside over a syndicate's death and find the fatal instrument filed under maritime underwriting. By day 50, she testified, the combine's hulls were carrying registered missing persons on falsified manifests inside a perfected claim, and every underwriter in the lanes had constructive notice. Coverage lapsed by operation of law. No coverage, no berthing rights at bonded ports. No bonded ports meant wildcat fields and fuel at extortion prices. Paid in cash the syndicate no longer had. Her speaking frill trembled and she pressed on. Honored adjudicators. My trust processes 40,000 filings a year, and I have never seen filings used this way. Each one was ordinary. Clerks see ordinary filings all day. It was the sequence. He was not filing papers as he went. He was walking a perimeter 1 document at a time, 11 worlds wide, and when it closed, there was no port in the lanes where the thing inside it could set down and breathe. People keep saying he never attacked them. She looked up from her notes, a small clerk in a chamber built to dwarf admirals, and gave the bench the sentence that the legal scholars now put at the head of the case books. With respect, that is not what the record shows. The record shows the attack lasted 61 days and was conducted entirely in lawful instruments, at walking pace, in plain sight, and that it worked exactly the way he walks. No single step looked dangerous. The danger was that the steps did not stop. The advocate asked her how the human had known to do all this, whether the trust had advised him, whether some agency stood behind him after all. I asked him that myself, she said, at my own window on day 16 because the filings were so clean. He said that in search and rescue, you learn the most important thing about finding people. She folded her hands. You file everything, and you keep walking, and you make it so that even if you go down, the search doesn't. He told me a search that depends on the searcher is a bad search. He was building one that would outlive him in case the moor took him, or the flats, or the combine got brave on some dark road. By day 16, honored adjudicators. He built his own replacement into the paperwork before most of the combine knew his name. Command thought they were being hunted by a man. They were being hunted by a procedure that happened for the moment to be wearing one. I adjourned the 3rd day there. The bench did not speak on the way out. There did not seem to be anything left in the abstract to debate. The inquest had stopped being about whether such thing could happen and become a matter of measuring, plate by plate and ledger by ledger, the thing that had. That night the tribunal's threat assessor filed his interim review, and I signed it, and one line of it has since been copied into the standing doctrine of 3 navies. Subject's capabilities assessed as unarmed, unaugmented, unexceptional, and unsurvivable as an adversary over any interval exceeding 20 days. Recommend all signatories treat human patients as ordnance. The 4th day belonged to the Combine's Quartermaster General, Denoval Hask, the most senior officer of the syndicate willing to take the ring in the human's presence, and the witness who finally gave the tribunal the inside of the collapse, the rooms, the orders, the nights. He had been granted testimony immunity, which loosened his account, and he had been ruined, which loosened it further. Ruined witnesses are the registrar's favorite kind. They have stopped editing. You want to know how 4,000 became none, Hask said, before the advocate had asked anything. I will save the tribunal a day. It was never 4,000 against 1. That was our error from the first week to the last. It was 4,000 individual arithmetics. Each operative, privately solving the same problem. Is what the Combine pays me worth standing between that and what it is walking toward? And one at a time, in no order we could predict, in the middle of meals and watches and battle drills, 4,000 people finished the arithmetic and put down their kit. He spread his gripping hands flat on the rail. You cannot court-martial an answer, honored adjudicators. We shot 2 deserters in the 2nd month. Desertion went up. The advocate took him through the escalation, order by order, and the chamber heard the Combine's command logic bend, then splinter. The doubled bounty that no one would claim, because the first 3 teams had become stories, and the stories traveled the lanes faster than the hulls did. The defense consultant hired at outrageous fee from a military contractor on the inner worlds, who reviewed the pursuit logs for 6 days, billed for 4, and returned the balance with a 1-line opinion the quartermaster quoted from memory. Your problem is not tactical. Your problem is that you have taken something a human will come back for, and you are now in an exchange where his costs are biological and yours are institutional. Institutions exhaust first. Settle. Did Command consider settling? The advocate asked. Command considered it nightly and rejected it nightly, Hask said. You must understand what the Combine was. We ran toll rights on 3 transit authorities. Our entire revenue was the belief that defying us cost more than paying us. The day we handed 12 laborers to 1 pedestrian because he asked, that belief died and the Combine with it. So Command's position, and I held this position too, I will not pretend otherwise, was that we could not afford to give him the 12. He was quiet a moment. We were correct in a way. We could not afford to give him the 12, and we could not afford to keep them. There was no solvent course left after Tessin. The raid had spent 60 years of fear for 110,000 in goods, and fear was the only currency we actually held. He understood that before we did. I have wondered since whether he understood it standing on the moor, watching us lift, before he took the first step. Adjudicator Farron asked what the inside of the Combine felt like by the 50th day. The quartermaster thought about it with the thoroughness of a man doing inventory. Like a hull breach without a hull, he said finally. Nothing loud. A pressure going out of everything. The watch rosters started failing first, night posts, the ones facing his last known heading. Then the outposts. Solway Junction emptied 4 days before he reached it. 40 operatives, fortified position, and when his mark came up the long road the gates stood open, and the barracks were swept and the keys were on the table with the inventory signed. They left him the inventory signed. Hask's gripping hands closed slowly on the rail. Because by then everyone had heard how it went at the places that resisted, which was nothing. Nothing went. He stopped outside and asked, and waited. He waited at Brassmark 19 days, outside the wall, in sight of it. He fixed the settlement's water pump on the 11th day because he was bored and the pump was bad, and the Oasis children had taken to following him around. 900 armed operatives behind that wall, honored adjudicators, and on the 19th day the depot commander looked out at a man oiling a pump in the sun and understood that the wall was the cage and the siege was the garrisons, and he put the prisoners on a hull that night and bought the Combine 11 more days at the price of every soul in that depot, watching him watch the hull go up. He didn't even hurry then. He had the registry number. Hulls land somewhere. That is the whole horror of it, if the tribunal wants it named. Everything we did bought days, and he was not counting days. We never once made him spend anything he counted. The advocate brought him at last to the ransom call, the only direct negotiation of the 61 days, on the 53rd night, when what remained of Combine Command had gathered in the operations room at Stonefall Verge on Ulmara, the syndicate's oldest holding, with the 12 in the inner keep and the human 4 days out, walking the ridge road, alone, in the sleet. They had opened a channel to a relay his notary had published. They had offered him money. The chamber recording was entered into evidence, and the tribunal heard it played, and I will set down what is on it, because the published record will be long, and this is what should survive. On the recording, the Combine senior negotiator speaks for 4 minutes. The offer is generous and grows as the silence lengthens. Compensation for Tessin, restitution for the settlement, a sum for the man himself that would have tripled his pension, transport home, guarantees sealed before lane notaries. The negotiator's voice is professional and his cadence accelerates in the last minute, very slightly, the way a man's does when the silence on the far end has begun costing him. Then the offer ends, and there is rain noise and the sound of boots on a wet road, unhurried, and the human's voice comes through, level and a little tired, the voice of a man interrupted at his work, and it says, "Send them out and I stop." 6 words. The negotiator asks for terms, conditions, process. The boots do not pause. "Send them out and I stop." All 12. The far gate is fine. A pause, rain. Then, as an afterthought, with what I can only describe as courtesy, "I'm about 4 days out. No rush." I have heard recordings from the bridges of dying ships and the floors of falling governments, and nothing in the tribunal's archive sits in me the way those 2 words sit. The negotiator, a professional of 30 years, can be heard on the tape beginning to answer twice and stopping twice, and what defeated him both times, I am certain, was the problem of what one says back to that. Threats answer threats. Prices answer prices. There is no answer to a man telling you kindly in the rain on foot 4 days from the last wall you hold that he is in no hurry. The channel stays open another 9 seconds. They are 9 seconds of boots. Then the recording ends, and on the 53rd night of the pursuit, Command did the last institutional thing it knew how to do. It doubled the gate watch, and the gate watch, hearing the recording because the recording was leaked within the hour, and Hask testified plainly that he was the one who leaked it. The gate watch began quietly, family by family, to send its dependents downhill into the town. "Why did you leak it?" the advocate asked. "Because the men deserved to hear what the wall was holding out," Hask said, "and because it was over, and Command was the only room in the Verge that didn't know it. You have heard the doctors and the trackers. They will tell you why he cannot be stopped, and it is all true, the sweat and the heart and the heading. But I was quartermaster general of 4,000, and I will tell the tribunal what actually killed us, because I watched it move through my people like weather, and I have had a season to name it." He turned, the only witness in 4 days, to face the gallery while testifying, and he looked at the small gray-haired man beside the water dispenser, who looked back at him with mild, patient regret. "We were an organization built entirely on being the thing that does not stop," Hask said. "Pay or we keep coming." That was the Combine, complete. 4,000 people holding one belief. And then a pensioner from a Moor colony walked through 11 worlds without raising his voice, and every soul in the lanes watched. And one morning each of my operatives looked in the mirror at the supposed thing that does not stop, and behind him in the glass stood the actual thing. He took his gripping hands off the rail and straightened, ruined, and precise. The Combine did not fall to a predator. It fell to a comparison. There is no countermeasure for being revealed as the imitation. Before the gate sergeant, the tribunal heard one witness I had ordered up myself, over the advocate's mild objection that her evidence was not strictly necessary to the petition. He was right. It was not necessary. It was indispensable. 4 days of trackers, doctors, marksmen, and ledgers had given us the pursuit from the outside, and the bench was at risk of ruling on a legend without ever hearing from the thing the legend had been for. So on the 4th afternoon, the registrar called Sarah Van Ottel, broodmother of Lowfield, the first of the 12, and she came to the ring with her smallest on her hip, because the smallest since that season did not do well when she left rooms. She testified about the inside, about the first transfer in the dark of a cargo hold, when the 12 were numbers chalked on a bulkhead, and the old Dravani archivist gave her water ration to the children and told them lies about where the ship was going, good lies, the kind that hold a child together. About the labor compound on Carhent, where the 2 human agronomists organized the 12 into watches, for sleep, for food, for keeping the smallest ones away from the wire, because the broodmother said the humans among them went strange in captivity in a way her own people did not. They got quieter and more orderly, and started treating the compound as a problem with edges. "I have been in lifeboats with humans," the elder agronomist told her on the first night. "The ones who make it are the ones who keep a schedule." So the 12 kept a schedule, in the dark and the wire, 11 worlds from home. And then she testified about the rumor in the chamber, which had heard the rumor described as a weapon, a doctrine, a structural cost, heard at last what it had been to the only people it was ever actually for. It reached us through the guards, she said. That is what the tribunal should understand first. We had no windows. Everything we knew about the outside came through what the guards said to each other when they thought numbers on a wall could not hear. And in the third fortnight, the guards began to talk about a man. Her smallest stirred. She settled it, without breaking sentence, the way brood mothers do. They did not talk about him the way soldiers talk about an enemy. We knew that talk. We heard it about lane patrols and rival crews, all swagger and ranging. This was different. It was the way my grandmother's generation talked about the sea fogs on Tessin, the ones that come up the moor with the tide. Checking the doors talk. Counting the lamps talk. One guard, a young Holland, asked the watch leader straight out. We all heard it through the vent. How far back is he now? And the watch leader said 2 worlds. And the young one was quiet, and then he said, that's 11 days, and nobody laughed. And a numbers on the wall feeling went around the cell. Because, honored adjudicators, the guards had started measuring the distance to a walking man in days. And even our children understood what that meant about how this was going to end. Distance is for things you have escaped. Time is for things you are waiting for. The advocate gently, when did you know who it was? I knew the pace, she said, before any name. The guards kept saying it. He doesn't push, he doesn't slow. 5.5 k's the hour, like it was uncanny, like it frightened them more than speed would have. And I sat in the dark against the wire and I thought, I know that walk. I have watched that walk go out my window in Lowfield every morning for 11 years, rain or shine, out to the gauges on the high moor and back. It is the walk of a man who has decided the day's work and is now simply delivering himself to it. Her frill rose slowly, and I told the others, it's Elias, it's the warden from the pump house and the elder agronomist, a human mind who had known him 11 years for a quiet neighbor who declined supplements and turned up to every flood. The elder agronomist put her head back against the wire and laughed, once, no noise in it, and said, oh, those poor bastards. And I asked her what she meant, because to us he was the man who fixed the pumps, and she said, I will give it as she gave it. She said, where we come from, the ones like him are why the rest of us got to evolve manners. They took something a search and rescue man counts. He's not coming to fight anybody. He's coming to finish a count. Did the knowledge change things inside? It changed everything inside. The broodmother said, that is my testimony if I have one. The tribunal has heard what he did to the combine's arithmetic. I can tell you what he did to ours. Captivity is an arithmetic too. Every day in the wire you do the sum. Does anyone know? Does anyone care? Is anyone coming? And the sum gets harder every day, and the day it stops adding, something in a person sits down and does not get up. I have seen it happen to grown males of 3 species in that compound. It never happened to the 12. It could not happen to the 12, because we had the guards' own mouths telling us every single night that the sum still added. 11 days back, 9 days back. He crossed the flats in season, 6 days back. The children made a game of it on the cell wall, a little chalk man, and every night they moved him closer. And the guards saw the chalk man and did not have the heart to wipe it, or perhaps not the nerve. And I will tell you what I came to understand, sitting in the dark, watching armed professionals decline to touch a child's chalk drawing. She paused, and her voice came down to the register my people keep for naming things properly. Hope is supposed to be the prisoner's ration, and despair the jailer's tool. He inverted it from 2 worlds away, at a walk, without firing a shot or sending a single word in to us. We had the hope. Our jailers had the calendar. By the last fortnight, the 12 of us were sleeping 8 hours, and our guards were sleeping 4, and the night before the last transfer, the young Holland stood outside our wire a long time and finally asked me a prisoner, his prisoner, if I thought the man would be reasonable, and I said the truest thing I knew, which is what Elias Mercer says about Tessin weather. He said the moor doesn't get angry at you for going out unprepared, and it doesn't forgive you either. It just goes on being the moor. And the young one nodded, and the next morning his post was empty, and his kit was folded, mind you, on the wire, and the children moved the chalk man closer. There was no cross-examination. The combine's counsel rose, looked at the broodmother, and the small one asleep against her shoulder, said, no questions, with the tribunal's thanks, and sat down, and I respected him more in that moment than in all his able advocacy before or after. But she had one more thing, and she asked the bench's leave to say it, and I granted it, and it is in the transcript, and I have never read it since without stopping work for the rest of the watch. The tribunal keeps asking what he is, she said. 5 days I have sat in that gallery listening. The trackers say a predator that does not empty. The doctor says a radiator that does not overheat. The clerk says a procedure wearing a man. With respect to all of them, they are describing the outside of the thing, the way you describe a storm by their roof damage. I lived 11 years next to the inside of it. The inside of it is this. On Tessoon, When the fogs come up and a child or a herd beast or a fool goes missing on the moor, every species in Lowfield does the same thing. We grieve. We are a sensible people. The moor is large and the fog is cold, and we light the lamps and we begin to grieve, because grief is what you do about distance. And every time there would be one light moving out into it. One, the same one. And I used to watch that light from my window, going out into the cold at the speed it always goes, and I will tell the tribunal what we knew in Lowfield that the Caldrath Combine learned at the price of its existence. The difference between humans and the rest of us is not the sweat or the heart or the stubbornness, whatever the plates say. It is that somewhere far back, the rest of us, all of us, every sensible species in these lanes, learned to answer distance with grief. She touched her sleeping smallest and looked at the gallery's third row, and her frill spread full, which among the Tasuni is given only to weather and to ancestors. They learn to answer it with boots. That's all he is, honored adjudicators. That's all any of them are, the ones like him. The light that goes out into the fog. And the only mistake the Combine ever made, the only one, but it was enough, was standing between that light and what it was looking for. I called the gate surgeon after her, and I confessed the bench needed the recess between, and took it without my calling one. Even the recorder drones, the bailiff swears, ran quiet for a minute, though I have signed no finding to that effect. The last witness before the human himself was gate surgeon Imreska, who had held the far gate of Stonefall Verge on the 61st day, and who had therefore been present at the only moment of the entire pursuit that anyone could call an ending. She was young for her rank, sworn to the Combine at 16 because the Combine was what her valley had instead of work, and she testified with her chin up and her speaking quills flat, in the way of soldiers who have decided to be believed. He came up the ridge road in the morning, she said. Sleet overnight, then clear. We had him on the long glass from 2 hours out, one figure, dark coat, walking. The Verge had 1,100 effectives on the morning rolls, though the rolls were lying by then. Call it 700 bodies and 400 willing. We had hard walls, gun positions, a sealed inner keep with the 12 in it, and stores for a year. Her quills lifted once and settled. I want the tribunal to understand that we could have held that position against a brigade. I had spent 3 years learning exactly what the Verge could hold against. And I stood on the wall over the far gate watching one 61-year-old man walk up the ridge road, and I could not find the version of the morning where we won. Nobody on that wall could. Holding was not winning. Holding just meant he stopped outside, the way he stopped outside Brassmark, and waited, and was seen waiting. The Verge could withstand an assault. It could not withstand being waited at, not by then. Every day he stood on that road, the Combine's last asset, the idea of the Combine, burned somewhere else along the lanes. He had stopped being a man at some point that season, you understand. He was a proof, walking, that the thing the lanes had paid tribute to for 60 years could be told no by anyone with patience, and the longer the proof stood unanswered at our gate, the truer it got. The advocate asked what the human did when he reached the walls. He stopped at the bottom of the approach, out of our arcs, which he had read off the stonework as he came. I watched him do it, the way a mason reads a wall. He took off his pack, he sat down on the roadside marker, and he ate something, and he filled his water flask at the runoff. Her quills went flat again. Then he asked, in a normal voice because the wind carries up that road, whether the people from Tessin were inside and well. And honored adjudicators, here is my testimony, and the tribunal may make of it what it likes. 700 armed effectives heard the question. The standing order was no contact. And from up on the second rampart, after maybe 10 heartbeats, somebody's voice, we never established whose, and I did not try hard, somebody's voice called down, "They're well. The little ones had the croup last month, but it passed." Gate Sergeant Reska looked at the bench, and the man on the marker nodded and said, "Thank you. That's all I came to know tonight." And he made his camp there in the open, in the cold, in front of 700 of us, and went to sleep. And the Verge stood all night watching one sleeping man the way you watch a fuse. And I think every soul on those walls understood by midnight that the siege had been over for weeks, and we were the only ones still attending it. What happened the next morning the tribunal already knew in outline. It was why we had all been convened. But the chamber heard it from the gate and from the inside, and the inside of it was this. At first light, the command staff met in the keep and voted to break out by air with the prisoners, one last transfer, a seventh, to a holding the rolls said still answered. The rolls were lying about that too. While the staff voted, the garrison held a quieter ballot of its own, the kind that is not called and never minuted, passed shoulder to shoulder along the walls. Gate Sergeant Reska testified that the first she knew of its result was her own corporal lifting the gate bar, and her own hands, she said, not stopping him. We opened the far gate from the inside, she said, not to him, for them. The 12 came up from the keep, The Broodmother first, carrying the smallest, then the old archivist with her case, then the rest, and the garrison stood off the road in 2 lines and let them through. No order authorized it. Every blade in the verge was present, and not one of them was anywhere near a hand. Her voice stayed level. First-hand Surat Vale came out onto the keep steps and saw his fortress standing at rest with its gate open, and he understood arithmetic faster than command ever had. I'll grant him that. He surrendered himself to the current transit authority by relay within the hour, chose the tribunal's justice over the roads, and I do not blame him, though I watched the human the whole morning, and I will swear to what I saw. There was no road justice waiting. There was no anger in that man at all. That was the thing none of our briefings survived contact with. We were a revenge culture. We understood vendetta. We'd have known how to fear it, bargain with it, buy it off. He hadn't come for the Combine. The Combine was just the terrain. He'd come for the 12, and the 12 walked out, and she stopped. The advocate prompted her gently. He counted them, she said, out loud. 1 to 12, touching each name. Then he thanked the wall, all of us on it, generally, for opening the gate, and apologized that it had all taken so long, as though the delay had been his discourtesy. The Broodmother's smallest wouldn't let go of his coat, and then the 13 of them went down the ridge road together at the little one's pace, which was slower than his, and he matched it without seeming to notice he was doing it, and that was the fall of the Caldrith Combine, honored adjudicators. No charge, no breach, no shot. A man matching his stride to a child's going downhill, away. The advocate had no further questions, neither did the bench. I adjourned early, and I will record honestly that I adjourned early because I needed the recess myself. On the 5th morning, the registrar called Elias Mercer, and the man in the gray coat folded his safety placard into the seat pocket, crossed the chamber floor, and took the testimony ring as though boarding his ferry at last. Sworn in, he gave his name, his age, his trade, retired. He said, then amended it conscientiously. Mostly retired. I still do the pumps. He confirmed the route, the 61 days, the 11 worlds. He answered the advocate's questions in sentences of plain freight, and the chamber, which had spent 4 days building him into a force of nature, met the force of nature and found it concerned chiefly with accuracy. Asked how he had tracked the prisoners across 11 worlds, he said, people remember a freight crew traveling with passengers who don't want to be there. You ask at docks. Dock hands see everything and nobody asks them anything. Mostly I just asked. Asked about the canyon pursuit, the relay teams, the ambush at the causeway. They were working very hard. Most of what they did would have worked on someone in a hurry. Asked whether he had been afraid. A considered pause, the first of his testimony, of arriving too late, every day. Nothing else out there was mine to be afraid of. Asked by adjudicator Ulismar, leaning forward over the bench, how he had endured it, the flats, the marshes, the cold snap, the sleet, 61 days at his age. And the human looked faintly puzzled, the way he had looked when his medical file was read aloud, and gave the answer that is now, I am told, quoted in security briefings on 40 worlds, and he gave it the way other species report the weather. I just kept walking. He seemed to feel, in the silence that followed, that this had been insufficiently helpful, because he added, apologetically, it's walking. You put a foot down and you're somewhere new. Anyone can do it. And then after a moment, with the only hesitation marker the transcript assigns him in 2 hours of testimony, anyone of mine, I suppose I mean. The cross-examination was conducted by the Combine's counsel, a sharp-mannered Holland advocate doing his honest best for clients who no longer existed, and it produced the exchanges the inquest is remembered for, so I will enter them with care. Counsel's strategy was the only one available, to establish that the human had constituted a threat, that the contracts posted on him had been defensive, that a reasonable organization could lawfully hunt what was hunting it. He began with the bounty teams. 3 teams were sent against you. 2 were broken, by cold, by exhaustion, by terrain. Men died on your trail, Mr. Mercer. Do you accept responsibility for that? They were on my trail, the human said. I never asked anyone to keep up with me. He thought about it further, scrupulous. I reported the one in the canyon to the relief station at Drev's anchorage. The cold snap was forecast. They'd have found him in time if his own people had filed a route plan. I filed mine with the notary every border I crossed. It's just good practice. You filed route plans. Counsel's ear fans flattened while being hunted. Public route plans, search and rescue habit, the human said. If something happened to me, I wanted the next man to know where to look. A pause. And it seemed fair. They always knew where I was going. I never once hid that. I was going to the 12. Everyone in the lanes knew where I was going, counselor. That was rather the point of going slowly. I watched the Combine's counsel absorb the sentence that his clients had never absorbed, that the pace had been the message, that every one of the 61 days had been deliberately a public demonstration. conducted at 5.5 kilometers per hour so that no one in the lanes could miss it. Counsel shifted ground. You stood outside Brassmark 19 days, outside the Verge one night. You never once attacked, you say. I put it to you that you understood perfectly well that your presence was the attack, that you were laying siege to morale itself, and that you knew those walls would rot from the inside, and that this patience of yours was a weapon you aimed. The chamber was very quiet. The human looked at his hands, and for the first time in 5 days he took a while to answer, and when he answered, the apology had gone out of his voice. What replaced it was not menace. I want this recorded exactly. It was something quieter and far older, and the nearest word my language has for it is certainty. I aimed nothing, counselor. I asked for 12 people back, and then I made it so that every day they weren't returned, everyone could see them not being returned. If that rot's a wall, the rot was in the wall before I got there. He raised his eyes. Your clients built 60 years on the promise that they don't stop. I never made that promise out loud, not once, on any world. I just demonstrated what it looks like when it's true. Counsel had one question left, and to his professional credit he asked it, because it was the question his ruined clients most needed answered, and the question the whole inquest had been circling since the first morning, and he asked it simply. When would you have stopped? When I had them back, the human said. And if the Combine had, counsel chose the words carefully, made recovery impossible, if the 12 had been lost, what then? Where does a thing like you stop then? The human was silent for a long moment. In the gallery, you could hear the recorder drones. He looked at counsel without anger, and I have presided 109 years, and what I saw in his face was the only moment of the inquest I would call terrible. A door held shut by a polite man, and the polite man deciding out of consideration for the room to leave it shut. I'd rather not answer that here, he said quietly. If it's all the same, it didn't happen. I walked the whole way making sure it wouldn't. Counsel sat down. He told me at the recess, off the record, that he had withdrawn the question in his own mind even as he finished asking it, because he had realized, watching the calmest creature in the chamber decline gently to look at something inside himself, that the answer would have been entered into the record of 11 worlds, and that no one in the lanes would ever sleep worse for not knowing it, and everyone might for knowing. The tribunal did not compel an answer. I have been asked in the years since, whether I regret that, I do not. Some depositions are best left where that man leaves them, behind him at his back, unvisited, like distance. We ruled within the week. The published holding runs 40 pages. Its operative line is one sentence. An open contract posted on a human national is void on issue across the 11 lanes, and the posting of one constitutes, in itself, an act of self-endangerment to which no insurer need respond. The legal scholars called the reasoning novel. It was not novel. It was the lane master's ledger, elevated to law. We did not forbid the hunting of humans to protect humans. The record before us contained no evidence that they require it. We forbade it as we forbid the breaching of reactor casings, to protect the party holding the tool. The advisory went out under tribunal seal to every signatory government, and because this account will outlive the inquest, I will close the official portion of it with the advisory's final section, which I drafted myself on the last night, after the others had gone to their rest, and I had sat alone with 5 days of testimony and one crumpled paper cone of a sound I could not put down. It reads, species of the 11 lanes have catalogued the human capability with reference to its strength, which is modest, its speed, which is poor, and its armament, which in the case at inquest was a walking staff and a water flask. These metrics are correctly recorded and entirely beside the point. The relevant human capability is this. They are the only known species for whom pursuit is cheaper than flight. A human who wants something back does not spend himself approaching it. He is restored by approaching it. Distance, terrain, weather, and time, the 4 walls of every fortress ever raised are, to a walking human, not obstacles but provisions. Therefore, let every actor in the lanes amend its risk doctrine as follows. Before taking what is not yours, you must no longer ask the old question, what protects it? You must ask the human question, who will come for it, and is there a number of days after which they will stop? If the answer to the second part is no, and with this species the answer is no, then no holding you possess is fortified. It is merely far away. And far away to them is a length of time. They are patient with time. Time is how they hunt. On the morning after the ruling, I did something a presiding adjudicator should perhaps not do. I came down from the bench and found Elias Mercer at the gallery door with his pack, already shouldered, and I asked him, not for the record, one tired official to another, whether there was anything the tribunal could offer him. Compensation. Transport. He had crossed 11 worlds. The lanes owed him passage anywhere in them, first berth forever, by my order if need be. He thanked me, and considered it with the care he gave everything, and asked whether the station had a postal office, because the broodmother's smallest had a hatching day coming, and he had seen a toy in the concourse window. A little wooden fairy, he said. She's mad for fairies. Then he shook my hand, which I am told is a human courtesy of considerable antiquity, and his grip was careful, the way the strong are careful, and he went down the concourse toward the public docks, declining the slideway at 5.5 kilometers per hour. I stood there longer than I will admit in any record, but this one, an old judge at a railing, watching one small gray figure cross a crowded concourse, and I understood at last why no scan, no plate, and no deposition had managed to file him. We classify what we fear by how fast it can reach us. Everything in the Tribunal's threat archive is ranked by speed of approach, the strike craft, the boarding swarm, the plague vector, fast things, all of them, because fast things are what fear was built to catch. There is no entry for a thing that comes slowly and does not turn back. There has never needed to be one. Every other species in the catalog eventually stops. He reached the far doors. The crowd between had parted for him without knowing why. They would have told you it was chance. And at the threshold he paused, the way he had paused at every border on 11 worlds, and adjusted the pack on his shoulders with the smallest settling motion. A man with somewhere to be, and all the time in the world, both at once, which I now understand is the whole of what a human is. The walk home is long. An aide beside me said, watching him go, he should have taken the berth. I have thought about my answer many times since, and I would not change it. It is the truest sentence I spoke in 109 years on that bench, and I offer it to every species that reads this record as the summary of the Mercer inquest, of the fall of the Caldrath Combine, and of the quietest capability in the known catalog. The walk is not long, I said. Nothing is far from them. We measure distance and how hard it is to cross. They measure it in days, and they are not afraid of days, and that is why, when one of them sets out walking toward you, the only true map of your position is the calendar. File that, I told the archivist, under warnings.